There are a few different studios that come to mind when we think of animated family films. However, the top two contenders are, of course, Disney and Studio Ghibli. These two production companies have similar content, yet are so incredibly and wildly different. Both are designed to entertain families with people of all ages. They're often about a journey where the main character learns a lesson and leaves better than when they entered. But what makes them so different from one another? Their style, story, characters, and their development. These are a few things that separate the two iconic companies. But let's look a little further into the history of these two companies to better understand them. Disney is an American studio formed in 1923, and for nearly 50 years, it was run by the Disney family. The company was passed from Walt Disney to his brother Roy in 1966. Walt was ambitious. He was never satisfied after a production. He wanted to make more and more in the name of Disney. He created merchandise and built family theme parks. After his death, his brother Roy carried out all of the plans that Walt left for the company. After Roy's death, the company was handed to the team that was personally trained by the Disney brothers. It was at this time the team began to notice a decline in viewers. Children and families were no longer interested in the content they were making, so they went on to create Touchstone Pictures, where older audiences, teens, and young adults could have content of their own. Once the company passed hands, they began to lose interest in the vision of Walt and Roy Disney. The ingenuity, the creativity, and the family aspect. For them, it became a massive way to make money. Disneyland wasn't enough. Disney World wasn't enough. They went on to make international Disney Worlds, Epcot, and continue to expand beyond creating new content. Now, this is an extremely brief overview. All of the things this company did and created, good and bad, have shaped the way many people view and enjoy animation and live-action entertainment. And with nearly 100 years of history, it's a challenge to compare it to something else that hasn't had the same amount of time to mature. However, on the other side of the world, decades later, in an odd parallel, two men would create an animation studio. In 1985, Tokyo, Japan, Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki created Studio Ghibli. They hit their big moment in 1989 with Kiki's Delivery Service. This is where they began their journey as an anticipated, talented, and respected animation studio. However, it would be a few years until they reached international fame. The film Princess Mononoke gained the studio international recognition in 1997. Similar to the progression of Disney, the studio has grown into a famous name in the animation world. While Disney still has 62 years of history more than Ghibli, we are seeing a similar progression. Ghibli was just handed over to Goro, Hayau's son, and with the final original founder leaving the company, we have seen drastic changes to its most recent animation, Earwig and the Witch. The reviews of the film are mixed, leaning towards negative. Similar to Disney, Studio Ghibli is going through its changes. So now that we have some brief history of each studio, let's dive into how they're different. I am mainly going to focus on the two-dimensional era of Disney, pre-Pixar. It is clear the animation styles, art style, and cultural nuances are very different. Disney is known for their iconic styles of art. However, it has gone through an evolution of a multitude of artists and art directors. The character designs often change based on the culture and understanding of the culture at the time, which is why Hercules looks different from, say, Aladdin or Prince Philip. These designs have had time to evolve and change. Disney also embraced the growth in technology. As the advancements in computer design grew, two-dimensional hand-drawn cells were less profitable for Disney's corporation. They transitioned into a computer-generated artwork as soon as they could, and didn't really look back. Many viewers embraced these changes, and the transition seemed smooth. The character appearances, of course, catered to what would be aesthetically pleasing to American audiences. The girls all have big eyes and rosebud lips, and they have fully styled hair without any flaws. It is what audiences at the time deemed most beautiful. Studio Ghibli has stayed very consistent with its art. Hayao was certain that he wanted to continue with hand-drawn animation cells. He did embrace technology to the point of enhancing those drawings, but they must be hand-drawn first. Having such a consistent style of artwork and storytelling is what helped make Studio Ghibli so memorable and favored. One can see a character and know that it's a Ghibli character. The art style follows a desexualized viewing of the characters. The female characters do not have big pouty lips or dramatically large colored eyes, and neither the male nor female characters are overly sexualized in their appearance. They typically look their ages and follow a more realistic view of what people actually look like. And of course, there are exceptions to all of these points. I'm mainly focusing on the majority. Most of these movies that we associate with Disney are based off of fairy tales, or other stories that were free for Disney to use at the time. Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, these were all fairy tales that have magic and a fantasy element that is not necessarily based in cultural lore or mythology. Many of Disney's movies have a low fantasy setting. What I mean by that is there is a regular life in the world we are watching, and then inside of that frame of existence, there are elements of magic. The genie from Aladdin, the fairy godmother from Cinderella, and the Wicked Witch from Snow White. These are all low fantasy stories that are used from other creators, like the Brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen, and Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. Studio Ghibli, on the other hand, has a real world, but then transports the viewer into more of a fantasy setting for the majority of the film. Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and The Cat's Return. Now, while it is understood that there are films for both companies that are opposite of the majority, Disney's Peter Pan and Studio Ghibli's From Up on Poppy Hill, Studio Ghibli also utilizes stories from other creators, like The Castle in the Sky. However, for the majority of the films, they are original stories, utilizing myth and lore that is unique to Eastern audiences. Disney films often follow a formula for how the plot will unfold. The main character is downtrodden. They have a moment with an unlikely experience where they fall in love. A magical assistant of sorts helps them change. The villain exposes them, and the magical element saves them. Then they live happily ever after. Again, there are of course going to be exceptions to this, but this is the majority of classic Disney movies. For Studio Ghibli, there is also a similar formula, but it's not as predictable and rigid as some of the Disney films. There is more fluidity and almost a sense of organized chaos in the Ghibli formula. Ghibli has a way of presenting male and female characters in a relationship that is satisfying, but doesn't end with romantic love. Hayao himself has said, quote, "I've become skeptical of the written rule that just because a boy and a girl appear in the same feature, a romance must ensue," end quote. Naturally, with a different method of storytelling and different styles of art, the characters are going to be different as well. From design to goals, they are honestly pretty difficult to compare. Disney characters usually don't look or act their age. The women in these films have some interesting apparel for their age, a lot of makeup, and a figure that is fairly unrealistic to how old they are. Ariel, Esmeralda, and Aurora are 16 years old. Jasmine is 15 years old, and Snow White is only 14. These characters are all extremely young to be so scantily clad with lithe figures and faces full of makeup. To add to the characters in Disney, the male counterparts are typically much older and tend to look their ages or older. Prince Philip is 20, Prince Eric 17, Aladdin 18, Prince Charming 31, and Phoebus 31. It makes some of the happily ever after romances feel a little bit uncomfortable. However, Disney never focused so much on the age or what limitations their ages may cause, so it is rarely discussed in many of the classic Disney films. Studio Ghibli characters have more of a realism in the age and action of the main character. Chihiro from Spirited Away is 10, Theo from Porco Rosso is 17, Shizuku from Whisper of the Heart is 14. There is a delicate balance of maturity and childhood in Studio Ghibli characters. The male counterparts are often younger looking than what we're used to seeing in the West. But they are appropriate ages within the realm of the film, and their aesthetic isn't unbelievable when it comes to their ages. However, a lot of the time in Studio Ghibli's stories, the age of the character matters in relationship to the story. Think of Howl's Moving Castle. If Sophie was cursed to look like she was 30 when she was already 18, we wouldn't know too much of a difference. But she was cursed to look as though she was in her 60s or 70s at age 18, which makes for a big difference. With the ages and aesthetic aside, the development of the characters differ in a lot of ways as well. While many of the early Disney films, we didn't see very much of the strong, independent female lead with the emotional and vulnerable prince, characters fit into their roles within society for that time frame. The princess was in danger, and they were saved by the prince. As those roles changed in history, they changed for the characters as well, but we still have a main lead that needs to be rescued. Most of the time, with some exceptions, the main character is forced to develop after the villain reveals their flaws. This makes the main character have no choice but to develop. Aladdin, after being revealed he's not a prince, has no choice but to develop in that moment. Ariel, after she loses her legs, has no choice but to develop. This is fairly standard for Disney films. If the characters were not to choose to develop in these moments, the movie would have no cohesive way of continuing forward. For Studio Ghibli, the characters develop over the course of the film because of the flaws they have and the mistakes they make. The characters don't fit into the mold of society, but rather live in their own realm of standards for characters. The prince doesn't always save the princess, and the princess doesn't always need saving. The characters have more of a complex depth to them. They do and say things that a person of that age would do or say, whether it is that they're afraid, angry, or confused. Each character expresses their emotions in a way that is completely unique to them. While Ghibli also uses external forces to push the main character into developing, they aren't always forced by the villain to develop suddenly, but rather we see them changing throughout the entirety of the film without losing the flaws that make them unique. Sen is afraid all throughout Spirited Away. She doesn't suddenly lose her fear, but rather uses everything she's learned throughout the film to make her choice in the end by showing us the result of her development. Both styles of character development are effective in how they are presented within the story. At the end of the day, these production companies are both incredibly special to many people, myself included. They each offer a unique experience with animated films. It is especially hard to compare the two. Western animation and Eastern animation are distinctly different. That is what makes them so incredibly interesting to look at side by side. Personally, I grew up watching Disney films. It shaped my childhood into one full of magic, dreams, and possibility. I have a special place in my heart for that classic Disney, as many people do. And Studio Ghibli sits on an equal platform next to it. There are some that say Disney is better because of their list of successes. Some will say it is worse because of the long list of mistakes and failures. As I stated earlier, Disney has 62 more years of history than Ghibli. The company has changed hands several times over. The vision and culture of Disney has changed. Studio Ghibli is in the infancy of its legacy. It hasn't had the time yet to change and make mistakes. So while it may seem I favor one over the other, they are both incredibly gifted and magical animation studios. I'm excited to hear what you guys think. Who's your favorite studio and why? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching everyone, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you haven't already, follow us on our Facebook page. The link is in the description below. Toodles!